Yes, I did. Yes, I sure did. This is another podcast of mine that I have created. It is called Not Another True Crime Podcast because, of course, this is an oversaturated field, which are the only podcasts that I really listen to besides people who I've been listening to from the beginning when I first started really getting into podcasts. The reason I decided to do a true crime podcast is because I have a sick infatuation with true crime. I always have since I was young. I mean, back when I remember watching 48 Hours and Unsolved Mysteries and those shows scaring the hell out of me. I think we had like Rescue 911 and all the shows like that we had. And then now that's all that's on TV. I mean, there's a whole channel, the ID channel, which I watch entirely too much of, that's all it is. It's just true crime. And I always wanted to be an investigator, but I didn't want to be a cop. I've just always been infatuated with true crime, and I am totally obsessed with it. So I had to do a podcast with it. This podcast, it takes a lot of research. It's a lot of information that you have to gather because it's true stuff. You know what I mean? This isn't things that I'm just making up on the fly. You know, like at my normal podcast, DannieBSpeaks the podcast, which is still in effect. It's still going on. But I wanted to add this one because it's something that truly keeps my interest. I just love it. I just love true crime. So hopefully I'm going to do a few episodes and see how I like it and see how the feedback is with it when people start getting back acclimated with my podcast and things like that. So we'll just see how it goes. But this is going to be episode 1 of Not Another True Crime Podcast. Okay, so let's just get right into episode 1. This one, as you saw in the title, is called Dear Tim Norman. Now, we'll get into who Tim Norman is for people who don't know or whatever, but I already had another episode planned for my debut episode of Not Another True Crime Podcast, but this story came up and it's just so crazy and outrageous and it's fresh, so I wanted to do my first episode with this story. So Tim Norman is the son and co-owner, now I'm sure former co-owner of Sweetie Pies, which is a restaurant, is based in St. Louis, Missouri. And it was started by Miss Robbie Montgomery, who started her career as a backup singer for Ike and Tina Turner. She was one of the original Ikeettes. And she did that until, I can't remember what year she stopped, but she didn't do it. She wasn't a backup singer for that long because she developed like something wrong with her vocal cords or something like that. So she had to retire from singing for a little bit. Then she got that taken care of and she went back to singing, but she didn't go back and she wasn't an Ikeette again. But that's really where she started her career in, and later on, of course, went and opened with her family recipes, Sweetie Pies. Now myself, I have never heard of Sweetie Pies until quite a few years ago, maybe about 6-7 years ago. They started a reality show on the OWN network. It was one of the first reality shows, I think, on that channel that really took off. And of course, OWN is Oprah Winfrey's network, and they had a successful reality show that just showed the ups and downs of the business and family drama and all this other stuff. And we were just introduced to this family that, with all the success that they've had so much tragedy. And one of the most recent tragedies that this family has had was the murder of Robbie Montgomery's grandson, Andre Montgomery, who was killed at the age of 21 back in 2016, March 14th, 2016 to be exact. Andre was the son of Robbie's oldest son. She has two sons, Andre and Tim. Tim's the youngest. Tim is still living. Andre was murdered back in, I want to say it was 95. I think that was the year they said. He was murdered in Los Angeles, gang related. Andre Jr. was only about 2 or 3 years old when his father was murdered. Andre ended up growing up with his mother in Houston, Texas. And of course, the Montgomery family lives in St. Louis. So I guess Andre was getting into some trouble, in his teenage years or whatever, and hanging out with the wrong crowds, and he wasn't focused on school or whatever. So his mom sent him to go live with Miss Robbie in St. Louis so she could, get him together and get him away from his friends so he could at least graduate from high school and get a sense of working and a sense of the business and everything like that to see if this was something that he wanted to do. Now, of course, he was very young and he may or may not have wanted to continue with the business, whatever, but he did get a good sense and grasp of the family business. He stayed with Miss Robbie for maybe about a year or so, and he did end up graduating high school, and that was featured on the show. Not long after he graduated, he ended up moving back to Houston. He wanted to go back to Houston with his mother and his siblings. They said that he would go back and forth between St. Louis to visit the family who he got close to, and of course to go see his grandmother and help out at Sweetie Pies and all this stuff. So he definitely kept up that relationship with that side of the family. Now, what I did notice is on Sweetie Pies, his uncle, Tim, and we'll get into Tim in a second and his background, but his uncle Tim was very, just mean to him. Instead of being like a mentor or a father figure while he was there, I mean, this is your deceased brother's son, who you may not really know, but the way he treated him was just crazy. And I peeped that from when they were on the show, when the show was going on. I mean, he would punch him and do all sorts of crazy stuff and just talk to him like he was crazy. And it was just really, now, especially now when you look back on it and what has happened and the news that we got, it's crazy. It is truly crazy that you look back on that stuff and you see what you thought you saw, something is going on here that is not cute. So let's talk about Tim Norman real quick. Now, Tim is Robbie's youngest son. He is currently 41 years old. She had him a little later in life because Miss Robbie is, I think, 80, if I'm not mistaken. She's in her early 80s, I'm pretty sure. I think that's what they said. But anyway, Tim, he did a 10-year bid in prison for armed robbery. When he got out, as soon as he got out, he was lucky and fortunate that his mother has this successful business that she wants to train him in and get him, as a partner in it and everything like that. So he goes in and he ends up being her co-partner in Sweetie Pies. His original job was to manage, at the time she had two restaurants. She had the original one, and then she had another restaurant that really stayed packed. So that was the one that she gave Tim to run. And it was going very successful, and you would see it on the show. Lines were out the door. And the one thing about Sweetie Pies, which a lot of businesses you see really now are doing, they would give people jobs, like second chances, and people who normally wouldn't be looked at for employment. And these people usually ended up being very successful, and they loved their job. They loved the family atmosphere and all this other stuff. And Tim was a huge part of that. And in the first season, we also saw that Tim, and I think he was I don't even think he was out of jail like a year or two by the time the show started airing or filming, I should say. He was getting ready to be a father. His girlfriend, fiance, she was actually his fiance, Janae, she was pregnant with his first child, their first child. And, we got to see that side of Tim, and he just seemed like, a real laid back, chill guy. And he was just really into the business and wanted to make it successful. And, you really didn't see a bad relationship between him and his mother, even though they were in this business together. And mind you, of course, this was still very fresh. This was only about maybe a couple years into him working at Sweetie Pies and being in this role. Then, as time goes on and seasons go on, you start seeing a different side of Tim. His attitude towards his son. He ends up not calling off the wedding to his fiance. And it was just like, he just seemed like he was turning into a different person. You didn't really look, at least I'm speaking for myself. I didn't really look at it as that bad. It was something about him that I was like, I don't really know about him. He's a little off in some instances, but then you would look at him like, oh, he's just trying to really get this business going. I mean, at the time he was like trying to get a lemonade line. I think he was getting merch like printed, Sweetie Pie's merch. And he was also looking to expand Sweetie Pies into other cities and states. He was trying to get, make it bigger than St. Louis, which I felt at the time was a little bit premature. But what do I know? I don't know anything about the restaurant business. But anyway, so against Miss Robbie's better judgment, she does allow Tim to go out to Los Angeles and open up one restaurant. Now, mind you, keep that in mind, one restaurant. He opens it, and it's more of like the people I know in LA that had been there, they said that the food was just okay. And it wasn't really like Sweetie Pies. Like, it wasn't the original stuff that you would get, like the recipes and things like that you would get back in St. Louis. So it was kind of a variation of Sweetie Pies, and people who would go there were expecting what they saw on TV, and they were expecting a good soul food meal, and that's what they weren't getting. So the business was kind of and he would treat his employees like crap. He would treat the just everyone around him, he would just start treating like crap, and everything was everyone else's fault. And money wasn't flowing in, so he was having money issues. Then he decides, even though this restaurant that's in LA isn't doing that great, he still decides to go on and open another restaurant. And I didn't really pay attention to how well that one did, but obviously it's closed now like the other one is. I don't think they have any more restaurants in Los Angeles. Then he ended up moving to Houston and opening up a restaurant there. And this was still when the two in LA weren't doing that good, but he ended up going there and, getting those going or whatever. Even his cousin Charles was a trip. He was my favorite person on the show. I love Charles. He'd been in the restaurant business for a while. He was young, but he had grown up in it. So he was telling Tim, like, we don't have the money for this. This isn't going to work. And would flip it back on Charles, like talk about how Charles is lazy and all this other stuff. So he didn't listen to anybody. Mind you, he's opening all these other restaurants and Miss Robbie doesn't know. Okay? She has no idea that this is going on. So then he's looking for other restaurants in other cities to open. And Miss Robbie is like, okay, you're doing too much. And these restaurants aren't up to par. And it's making my name look bad. So she ended up suing him. She ended up suing her son, her business partner, to stop him from opening up restaurants in her name and using her money. And I think I kind of just lost track. And then the show ended up going off the air like that was the last season. A mess, a hot mess. So that's pretty much the background on Sweetie Pies and the relationship with Andre Jr. and Tim's background a little bit. And I know I'm missing a lot of things, but I just wanted to give a brief synopsis because we're really about to get into the crazy right now and the reason why we're here. And before I forget, Jennifer Williams, just stop. Girl, don't even. Y'all know Jennifer Williams from Basketball Wives. She dated Tim very briefly, and of course, we know why. Money and I guess fame, I guess you could say. But she was trying to marry Tim, like pressuring him into getting a ring and all this other stuff. And of course, the relationship didn't end up working out. She had to file restraining order charges on him, and she said he was stalking. They went to court and all this other stuff. Of course, he denied it. And because of who she is and her reputation and just always being there and thriving off of drama and all this other stuff, a lot of people didn't believe her. I personally didn't care, so I'm not taking back anything that I said about her. But she can feel a little vindicated in the situation, I guess, but still, girl, don't turn this in to be about you. Do not use this situation involving this young man's murder and his family and try to get yourself back out there, which, who am I lying? Of course you will. But girl, just shut up. And it's not about you. Just know that. But we know you're going to play the role anyway. So, dear Tim, we're just going to go in, why not? Why not? So let's just go. So your funny built wide hip ass is just going to set up your own nephew's murder. That's just what you're going to do. Okay. So that's what's happened. Tim Norman was arrested by federal agents in a conspiracy plot to murder his nephew, Andre Jr. This is just too much. So I don't even know where to begin, but a lot of more developments have come out since I think the first time a friend sent me the article on, was it Wednesday? Either Tuesday or Wednesday evening. And I was just reading it like, wait a minute, like what, excuse me? Apparently Tim and a stripper, because we know strippers are the most reliable people who are just not going to sell you out and, whatever. That's who you want to get to do your dirty work. They set up Andre to get murdered. Why? For insurance money. Because 2 years prior to his murder, Tim, his uncle, took out a $450,000 insurance policy. Well, actually, those were two insurance policies totaling $450,000 on his nephew. Not only did he take out these policies when he had no right to, but he lied on the application and he forged Andre's signature. It just crazy. You had to be a sick person to do this. Now, supposedly, and I don't know if this is from state to state, but I guess in Missouri for sure, or I don't know if it's based on the insurance companies or whatever, but you can't get a full payout for an accidental death up to like 2 years or something like that after you set up the life insurance policy. And mind you, not only these two, he went back to try and get a third, but they denied him, which he should have been denied for the first two. I still don't know how he pulled that off, because at the time, I think Andre was 18 when he got these policies on him. So Andre was of age a little over 2 years, and a little over 2 years after the insurance policy finally went into effect, to where if an accidental death happened, he would get full payout. He gets killed. Red flags everywhere. Just dumb. And the thing that kills me is I've watched enough true crime to know that you were very sloppy in your work. For you to be a professional criminal, you just did horribly. This is not your thing right here. It's just not. But there was a conspiracy to kill Andre Jr. and it went down. Now, before I get into the events of what happened to lead up to this, the insurance policy was the first red flag that should have went up, and the reason as to why he ended up getting murdered. Reading more on this or whatever, and I'm going to keep following this story, but allegedly, Andre had told people, like family and friends or whatever who he was close to, if anything ever happens to me, Tim did it. So he knew that his uncle despised him so much. And a lot of people are saying that Tim was jealous of Andre because it seemed like Miss Robbie was really trying to mold him into taking over the business. And not only that, with Andre in the picture, I'm sure he will be splitting Miss Robbie's estate with Tim. Tim probably didn't want that. He wanted to be the only beneficiary, obviously, because he's crazy and money hungry. So, there's a motive right there, too. Now, instead of me saying in my own words what happened, I'm going to read the original article, the first article that was posted about this. And it's from the Riverfront Times. It was released August 18th, 2020. So the title goes, Sweetie Pie's Tim Norman, exotic dancer, charged in murder for hire plot. James Timothy Norman of Sweetie Pie's fame is facing federal charges alleging he conspired with an exotic dancer in the murder of his 18-year-old nephew, Andre Montgomery. Sidebar, it says 18-year-old nephew because this is when the plot started. Okay, because he was 21 when he passed away. So anyway, the 41-year-old son of legendary restaurant owner Robbie Montgomery was arrested this morning at his home in Jackson, Mississippi, according to a statement from the U.S. Attorney. Norman, who starred with his family in the show Welcome to Sweetie Pies, had feuded with his mother over money in recent years after she sued him for opening restaurants under the Sweetie Pies brand without her permission, according to court records. It was a messy public spat, but federal authorities say Norman executed a far more sinister conspiracy to have his teenage nephew killed in 2016. According to the criminal complaint unsealed today, Norman had taken out $450,000 in life insurance policies on Andre Montgomery in 2014, and he was the sole beneficiary. In 2016, Norman was living in Los Angeles. Phone records obtained by investigators showed that leading up to Andre Montgomery's murder, Norman and a Memphis-based dancer named, now in here it says Taria Ellis, but I think her name is Terica, because that's what's said like in the formal complaint and everything like that. Is Terica or Tarika. I don't know how the hell she pronounces it, but anyway, they headed to St. Louis and communicated over burner phones. We'll talk about the burner phones later. Ellis also started contacting Montgomery, sending him her Instagram account handle, which was at the time Alexis the Great, which has been deactivated now, I think, and texting that she would be visiting St. Louis. This was how they were setting him up with this chick. So there's that. I'm on my way in town, she wrote him in an email on March 10th, 2016, according to court records. 3 days later, Norman flew into St. Louis and booked a room at the Chase Park Plaza Hotel. The next day, March 14th, Ellis contacted Montgomery to figure out where he was, according to the complaint. Cell phone records showed that he texted her the address of a house, 3964 Natural Bridge Avenue in the city. Ellis then called Norman. That night at 8:02 p.m., Montgomery was shot to death at the house on Natural Bridge, and investigators believe Ellis was there. Location data from her burner phone put her at the scene, and in one of Montgomery's final phone calls, he spoke to his girlfriend, who later told investigators she could hear a woman's voice in the background. 1 minute after the 18-year-old was shot, Ellis made another call to Norman. Despite being at the scene of Montgomery's murder at 8:02 p.m., Ellis's first phone call was not to the police, but rather to Norman at 8:03 p.m., at which time her phone location data showed that she was driving in a direction consistent with her returning home to Memphis, Tennessee, the criminal complaint says. Phone records would then show the phone moving south along Interstate 55. Norman's phone showed him flying back to Los Angeles, arriving early in the morning after the killing. That same day, March 15, 2016, both burner phones went dark. Back in Memphis, Ellis began depositing money, $3,020 in a checking account that previously he had a negative balance, and another $4,340 in a savings account, opened the same day. I mean, dumb. On March 17, 2016, she deposited another $1,900. On March 22, 2016, she and her mother, On March 22, 2016, she and her mother and daughter flew to Los Angeles. I promise I can read y'all. There's not much information in the court records about what they did there, but authorities say location data for her mom's phone showed that at least one occasion they were with Norman. At the end of April 2016, Norman wired Ellis $700. Norman waited a week to try to collect on his murdered nephew's life insurance policy because, of course, he didn't want to be suspicious, Authorities say. On March 21, 2016, he called the bank, but he never provided all the documentation required and still hasn't gotten the money, according to court records. He's now being held without bond at a jail in Madison County, Mississippi. He and Ellis have been charged with conspiracy to use interstate commerce facilities and commission for murder for hire, resulting in death. The case is being investigated by St. Louis police and the FBI. So I'm pretty sure neither one of them she's in Memphis and he was in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm sure that they have been extradited or they're getting ready to get extradited to St. Louis. But that was the original article that was posted. I'm not going to go through the affidavit because it's crazy. I mean, it's so detailed. I'm going to put it in the show notes and I'm going to post it on my website so you can read it if you haven't had the opportunity to read it yet, but it is crazy. So, as you can see in that, Tim he never collected the money because he didn't have the proper documentation. You have to have certain documentation to to get a life insurance payout. They're not just going to give it to anybody just because you set it up. I mean, yes, sis, they're going to take your money every month to pay on this policy, but you still had to provide the right documentation and you didn't do that, so you never got it. Now, somebody I was talking to pointed out that I think it was in the final season of Sweetie Pies, Miss Robbie said that her house had been broken into, and this wasn't long after Andre's murder. It had been broken into. It was like they were just looking for like papers and documentation and stuff like that. I bet anything that Tim was behind that break-in. Now, what if his mother would have been home? His elderly mother would have been home when the break-in to her house happened. That could have went all wrong. However, they didn't find the documentation that they were looking for, and mainly probably because Andre's mother is still living. She would actually be the next of kin, not his grandmother, his mother. So obviously his mother, who lives in Houston, Texas, had that. I mean, just dumb. And let's talk about the burner phones real quick. Now, if you watch these true crime shows or whatever, you see a lot of people use burner phones. And what a burner phone basically is, it's one of those disposable phones. And it's really not disposable, but it's like one of those track phones or something like that, where like a prepaid phone. People buy them to do little things and then they'll get rid of the phone, they'll sell it, or they'll just throw it away, especially if you're doing something dirty. A word of advice, and I hate to give criminal type of advice, but if you watch true crime, you would know this. Don't have your burner phone on the same time that you actually have your regular cell phone on. I mean, that's just what I'm thinking. I mean, what do I know? I'm not a criminal, but I've watched enough to see, that could be a problem. Because that was one of the ways they were able to really track them and tell who had the burner phones, was because both of these idiots had their regular cell phones on and they were still communicating on the burner phones. And they were communicating around the time of the murder. She called him 1 minute after the murder. So, now, word on the street has been that Tim has been suspected by people for a long time as being involved in the murder of his nephew. I don't know where they got this from. Maybe it was something Andre said. Remember earlier in the podcast, I said he was telling people if something happens to me, Tim did it, was behind it or whatever. So I'm wondering, was that something that tipped people off, or was Tim sloppy and he just was looked at as somebody who would do something like this? And people keep saying, I read in the comments and things like that, and I'm not somebody who really reads the comments, but I'm trying to get the tea. People keep saying that I couldn't imagine setting anyone up alone, a family member, to get murdered. Yeah. Most people with decency and who aren't psychos don't think that way. So most of us wouldn't think to set someone up, especially a family member. I look at it like this. I protect my nieces and nephew like they're my own kids. So there is no way that something like that would ever cross my mind in a million years. And that's because I don't have, I'm crazy, yeah, but I don't have, not that kind of crazy, the good kind of crazy. So there's that. Now let's talk about real quick, and this is just going to be real quick because I was disgusted when I read this part, but I guess Tim decided to pull a Diana Ross at Florence Ballard's funeral. You know how she made Florence Ballard's funeral all about her with all the dramatics and everything like that? Well, apparently, Tim arrived at Andre's funeral in a bulletproof vest with bodyguards. Now, sis, what did you need all that for? A bulletproof vest and bodyguards. I have no words. And Andre's sister, she posted on her Twitter that, she called him some choice names, of course, but she said, I knew it was you. That's a damn shame that so many people knew it was him. I mean, it's crazy. That just boggles my mind that you're going around, you're thinking that someone that you know who was behind your loved one's murder, and it's their family member, it's their uncle. That's crazy. I can't even think about that. I always wondered why when Tim's restaurants were failing in other cities. Now, I didn't know he was living in Jackson, Mississippi, because I hadn't been following, the show's off. I haven't been following, what's been going on. I hadn't heard anything. I didn't know he was living in Jackson, Mississippi. So he's not even trying to have a relationship with his son. And from what I hear, he hasn't seen his son in over a year, if not longer. And Miss Robbie, she was on Twitter acting up, or social, I don't know what, but she was on social media acting up about a month or so ago. Her and Janae were going back and forth. And of course, Janae is TJ, or Timmy, that's Tim's son's mom, Tim's ex-fiance. And she's married. I think she has another child now, because I think she was pregnant in the last season of the show. Don't quote me, but I remember seeing that. But I know that she's married now, and she has another life. And I guess the last time that Tim went to her house to pick up Timmy or whatever, he caused a scene and threatened her husband, and they had to call the cops on him. So that's why he says he hasn't been around. But I mean, there's other ways that you can see your son. And Janae was saying that other people in the family see him. So there's no excuse as to why you or your mother can't come see him. I mean, so that was just something crazy. And that was the first thing that I heard about them in a long time. And I was just like, oh, Miss Robbie, you on here acting up. Don't do that, sis. Don't be that girl. Don't take your business like that to social media or whatever. And people were bashing Janae and everything and saying, oh, you ought to be, you're so wrong. And, of course, going after her when she's just like, hey, I'm not stopping them. They're the ones that don't come around. I'm not going to chase after you. You're obviously not showing any effort to come see your son and grandson. So, I mean, it is what it is. I'm going on with my life. Just a mess, just a drama-filled mess. The other day, I think it was yesterday, I've read that there was an update. A former producer in St. Louis who actually, I think the last thing that he produced was Nelly's Nellyville album. He was one of the producers on that album, but now he's turned a insurance agent. And I guess he was one of the ones that was involved in these insurance policies. So he's being indicted on falsifying and all this other stuff. And it's just a lot still going on. There's still a lot developing. I haven't heard anything about who actually pulled the trigger. From what I'm understanding, it wasn't Tim, because he wasn't in that. He was in the vicinity, but he wasn't there like at the house when it happened. And another thing about that house that really just threw me off was they set him up in that neighborhood. And I'm trying to figure out how he got to that house. I guess he was doing music or something like that. And when they were talking about music, I thought they were saying that the former producer turned insurance agent, that he's the one that was doing music with him, but I didn't see any of that. I'm not saying that that's something that happened, but I just read that he was a part of the insurance transaction. So mess. But that area, they chose that area. See, this really took some thought, but it was still sloppy. But they chose that area because I guess it's a very, very bad part of town. And Tim's own father, while his mother was pregnant with him, was killed on that street. And so was his cousin, who I don't know if, from the show, if you watch the show, Monique, his cousin Monique that had the short hair. And she and Janae were, real good friends. They were real close. And she had the daughter that went on to school, that was going to college or whatever. But and I like Monique too. I liked her too on the show. Her and Charles were probably my two favorites. But her brother Aaron, who Tim said he was real close, they were like brothers, was killed on that street as well. So Andre getting killed on that street, I mean, not only tragic in itself, but bringing up all these memories of, other people in the family that have been killed on that street. And where Andre was shot, they said that they could see, Tim said, I could see grandma's house. So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. And let's talk about being on the street again. If you watch the show, you saw Tim take his mother to the spot where Andre was killed. And he's just there and no emotion, whatever, and just, talking about it and just crazy. And I guess he's never attended like any of the memorials that they've had for Andre. He hasn't attended one, and obviously we see why. And then there's a clip going around, like I saw it on YouTube, of it was the finale interview. So it was, the reunion show, I'm sorry. And they're talking about Andre's murder, and for some reason, and I didn't, of course you're not thinking about it at the time because, we didn't know, but they kept the camera focused on Tim for a very long time. And he showed no emotion. His mother's over there breaking down. Now, I'm not a crier or nothing like that, but if I see my mom hurt and breaking down, I'm going to feel a little something, So, Miss Robbie was done. Monique was sitting right next to him crying. When they asked Charles about him, Charles broke down. He just showed no emotion. Then he just started talking about how this is what happens when the men in our family haven't really had any great male role models. The men in our family are killed and all this other stuff. But I was just really curious as to why they kept the camera on him for such a long time. It was just weird. Just so much mess. Oh my gosh. This is just the craziest shit ever. So another word on the street in St. Louis is that a family friend who I guess is an FBI agent or some high up at the St. Louis Police Department, whatever, he's close with the Montgomery family. He actually let Miss Robbie know a couple of days before Tim got arrested what was going on, that they were getting ready to arrest him and why. Mind you, he got arrested in Jackson, Mississippi. That's where he was living. Apparently, Tim got ran out of St. Louis for some reason, and I don't know if it was his guilty conscience or people were after him or something, but he never went back to St. Louis to hardly visit, and he never went back to live. After he left to go to LA, he never went back there to live. So that says a lot right there, too. But when Miss Robbie found out, I guess she contacted her family and friends and said, "You all are not to speak to Tim." She instructed them, "You all are not to speak to Tim. He is dead to us." I was just like, oh, okay. All right, girl. I get it. I totally get it. I'm sorry, but Tim has seemed to have caused his elderly mother, not only his mother, but his elderly mother, so much grief and pain on top of what she's already experienced in her life. And I know what a sociopath is. I know what a psychopath is and all that other stuff. I think he's both. I truly do. Something is, especially when you can take your mom with a straight face to the site where you set up your nephew to get killed. And Andre was the last part of her deceased son's legacy. That was a part of him that she had, that she could hold on to, that reminded her, I'm sure, of her son, Andre Sr. Oh my gosh. And then, to top it off, he never even got the payout. So it was for nothing. All of this was for nothing. And then his fat ass is in the mugshot just smiling, just cheesing, this is terrible. I'm still in shock from when I first saw the article come across my text when my friend sent it to me. I'm still in disbelief that something like this has happened. But I've rambled on enough. I know this is just part one of this, and I will be giving more updates as time goes on. When I hear more things, whatever, I'm pretty sure there'll be some updates coming in the next week or two about what's going on. I will be following it. I will be hitting up St. Louis websites, their news websites and everything like that to keep abreast of what's going on. Oh, that was the other thing. I didn't know. I had no idea that the Sweetie Pie's cast, that family, they did an episode of Iyanla Fix My Life, and I guess Tim was showing out so bad that they couldn't even air it. They had to stop production, and they refused to air the show because it was that bad. I need to know what happened. I need some deleted scenes or some behind the scenes type stuff. They need to release that because I need to know what happened. And that could be some good evidence to go against him with all this going on. So yeah, let's see that. Let's roll that. Let's, do y'all's thing. But that is crazy. I never knew that. I did not know that they did an episode. Just a mess. But like I said, I will be following this, and I know this episode was all over the place, but it was just so crazy and so much. And I was just gathering information as I went along. It's still still in the early phases of everything, but this has been my first episode of Not Another True Crime Podcast. So thank you all for listening to the very first episode of Not Another True Crime Podcast by DannieBSpeaks. I am so excited about this new podcast coming up. And as I mentioned, yes, I will still be doing DannieBSpeaks, the podcast. I'll explain why I haven't been doing it for months. Enough of that. That'll be discussed over there. On here, we're going to be covering current cases. We're going to be doing old cases. From years ago, these are just things that have stuck out in my mind, over the years, and things that I've seen on true crime shows that I've watched and my take on them and what I think about them. So I hope you all enjoy this. And as I mentioned, I know this episode was all over the place, and I'm going to try to, hopefully I put it together for it to make sense, but it was just so much going on. I didn't, even know where to begin. I just started talking, and when things hit my head, I just recorded. So that is what it is. Y'all know how we do the podcast over here. It is what it is. No rhyme, no reason, no format. That's how it goes. But thank you so much again for tuning in. If you have any questions, please hit me up, DannieBSpeaks@gmail.com, on my social media, which you can find and get connected to on DannieBSpeaks.com. If you would like to be a sponsor, or if you would like for me to sponsor you, please hit me up at DannieBSpeaks@gmail.com, and we can discuss all of that great stuff right there. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will catch you all on the next one. Peace.